Hi, everybody. This is Erica Mello, and welcome to episode number 66 of Tough to Treat. And before I get into the podcast, just a favor and an announcement. We are still trying to get actually to 100 reviews on iTunes. So for those of you who have left us a review, thank you. It means more to us than you know. And for those of you who have not and who have found value in listening to the podcast, we would most appreciate it if you could leave us a real quick, short review on and what you liked about the podcast. We thank you. And an announcement: we have formed a Facebook group. It is relatively new. It is called Tough to Treat, and in parentheses podcast. And if you just if you're on Facebook, you could put that into the search bar. And it's really an extension of the podcast and much more. So we look forward to seeing you on Facebook and onto the episode. So this is a patient of mine who is postpartum. Postpartum is always postpartum. And this person has two children. Her youngest is 5, her oldest is 8, and she's had persistent low back pain for a very, very long time. And whenever a body perceives threat, they have as a threat value, and her response to this threat of low back pain is to almost cocoon like into their back. She can't. That is her thing. That's how she responds to back pain. So Susan and I clinically reasoned as to why this happens, how to help somebody get out of this long term. And we talk about a few of the things that I saw in standing, specifically her center of mass, which is really interesting. So listen right to the end. It's a real gem. Thanks a lot. Bye. Hi, everybody. This is Erica Mello, and I'm with my wonderful co-host, Susan Clinton, and we are Tough to Treat. How are you, Susan?
I'm good, Erica. How's
Very
everything
good.
with you?
Good, good. We're in the middle of our dreary winters here, and not a lot of sun in New York this winter. Not a lot of snow either. So I think I'd rather have the snow personally, but we'll move on. I have a little bit of a scratchy voice today, so apologies on that. So let's just get started. This is a patient I have seen, only a couple of times. We have a new Facebook group, FYI. It's called Tough to Treat, and in parentheses, podcast. I did post her. I don't know. It's a relatively new group. We've had it a couple weeks now, so I think I probably posted her about a week and a half ago. And I'll give you the brief scenario. She is 43 years old, around that, maybe early 40s. She is a stay-at-home mom. She has 2 children, 5 years old and 8 years old. And she came to see me. She was referred to me by an acupuncturist I know here in the city. And she was seeing a therapist who moved out of the state, moved out of the city of New York. And this particular therapist was also, I believe, a certified Pilates instructor, or just did a lot of Pilates with her as well. So she has low back pain. She feels compressed, and it was really pretty much more bilateral low back pain and an occasional, I'll quote her, wonky rib. And when she was feeling okay, the therapist would do some Pilates work with her. And when she was not feeling, when her back was flared up, the therapist would do some hands-on manual work with her. And in addition to that, plus the acupuncture, it was seeing, I think she still is, a Pilates instructor here in New York as well, regularly, just Pilates only. So she's somewhat active and pretty much committed to physical therapy. So when she came in to see me, she was flared up. So her flare is when she's got this back pain, she can't arch, she can't extend her back at all. That's her gig, so to speak. That's how she manifests. And no other pertinent history except that she's very hypermobile, did a lot of gymnastics as a child, and her two children were normal vaginal births. She did carry them on her left side pretty much consistently. Uh, and right now, obviously not, they're older, 5 and 8, so she's not picking them up or anything. So that's her main history. So when I took a look at her in standing, she kept harping on her wonky rib, and I was like, how do you know you have a wonky rib? She goes, I wake up and I feel like I'm shifted or it's sticking out, to quote her. And, I asked her how many episodes of low back pain she gets. And she says she gets it fairly frequently, but it always manifests as the inability to arch her back or do a back bend in standing. Uh, any questions so far, Susan? Are you good?
When did all this start?
I would say probably about 5 to 10 years ago. She's been seeing the therapist here about 10 years. So I would say probably 10 years. But it just gets
So
worse, yeah. So
did,
before her children were were born.
did she have these problems when she was pregnant?
No. The first child, no. The second child, a little bit.
Okay. So she went through her whole first pregnancy without a pain flare.
Correct.
Okay, so it wasn't coming on as much 10
Right.
years
And she,
ago, or
right. Yeah, she was managing it with this Pilates manual therapy combo pretty much. But when I saw her, her therapist had moved like
mm-hmm.
months already at this point.
Okay. And when she says that she can't do back bends or arch her back in standing, can she do it in sitting or on all fours or?
So I tested that. No, she can do it in prone on elbow. She can do
Uh-huh.
that. And she can do it a little bit on all fours, but not much.
Okay.
It was mostly in standing.
Okay.
She couldn't do like an anterior tilt on a ball, for example, in
Okay.
sitting. That was hard for her.
Okay.
So when I took a look at her in standing, I just do the quick center of mass, and she was really, really far back on her heels.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, really far back and pretty, centered. Otherwise, medial, right to left, pretty centered. No significant. I mean, she's not that tall. She's about average-ish height. Very sort of a petite stature, and pelvis pretty low, major significant rotations. I sort of, because of her thoracic complaints, I kind of went up the sides of the rib cage, and she's had a few shifts here and there. Nothing crazy. And then I went up into her underneath her armpits, and she had a couple of shifts in her ribs, 2, 3, 4, 5 to the left, but nothing really out of control, right? So I tried to get her to. I moved her forward just to get her a little bit off of her heels, and the minute I did that, her upper trunk and her ribs were shifting left, shifting right. Like her body didn't like to be on her toes at all. So she really sort of sunk back into that, center of mass backwards. And I then tested her. I said, show me how you do a back bend. I mean, it was like she didn't even get to her thorax. She literally lifted her head, and that was it. Like she couldn't even
Mm-hmm.
elongate her thorax. She couldn't even get her trunk forward at all, and it reproduced her symptoms. So, do you want me to stop or keep going?
No, it's fine. The shifting forward, oftentimes I see that in the beginning, when I just ask them to just shift their weight a little bit, towards their toes.
Mm-hmm.
If they're on their toes, I have them go the other way. Just something different. And oftentimes I see that in the beginning they have a lot of difficulty coping with it because if this has been going on for over 10 years, and she carried 2 babies, this is where her vestibular system lives. And so
Yeah.
they don't like it when they have to shift forward because their brain is set up for them to, even though it's painful and compression doesn't feel good to them, they still stay there because that's where the motor patterns are.
Right.
So it takes time to change those motor patterns for sure. But yeah,
Yep.
sometimes I'll see a lot of different kinds of shifting and craziness and things like that as they're trying to kind of figure out how to cope with this new position.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really interesting because when I shifted her, she just couldn't do it, and she did wasn't painful. It's just her upper trunk really didn't like it. I was getting
Mhm.
everything was being made worse from her, like her belly button and above. So I ended up I asked her if anybody had over the years put like some a pelvic support on her, and she said, no, but when I wrap a sweater front waist, the tie in the front around my hips, I feel a lot better. And I was like, oh, okay. So I'm thinking something pelvic or within the pelvis, but that was the only thing that actually made her feel better besides just some of the work that was done manually in the Pilates. So that's how she managed everything over the years. And basically, I asked her how long these flares lasted, like her inability to arch her back and back bend. And she said they could be like at least a week, but she functions.
Mhm.
And I said, well, if you have a pair of Spanx or just wrap your sweater, you should feel better. And she's like, that's a good idea. I'll do that. And I just like off the cuff just told her to do that because that does make her feel better. So I had her go prone on elbows, no problem, like right up into full cobra, like immediately, which is not unusual. We've talked about this before, right? They can
Mhm.
they can't arch their back in standing or do any back bend, but they can go into full cobra in an unloaded position. She had no problem there.
Mhm.
And I'm just going to digress for a second. I posted this in the Facebook group as I mentioned, and someone had suggested we had a bunch of suggestions. Some tibial nerve tension, forcing her to sort of get her center of mass posterior. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think neural tension can certainly
No,
drive it.
yeah.
And you're talking about the tibial nerve, so if it doesn't like to
Mm-hmm.
be stretched, then they're not going to go forward. But to me, it's almost like, it sounds like it's hanging up further up the chain if it
Yeah.
is neural tension.
Yeah.
Um, because, she's not having any pain in her feet or her calves or anything like that.
No, no, but her feet were very rigid. That was
Yeah,
the only
yeah,
major thing that I saw.
yeah. So that may have been another reason she had difficulty shifting her weight forward. But I,
Yes.
I really find that discoordination, because they're so used to living back there, even though if their lower body can come forward, the upper body has no idea what to do. And listen, carrying two babies, her rib cage is probably, in a more of a up position than a down position, especially if she's short too,
Mhm,
or
mhm.
just of average height.
Yeah.
And they don't have any idea where to like, it just takes time to kind of like figure out where all that needs to go.
Mhm,
And
mhm,
yeah, so I agree with you that it probably looked worse up above as she tried to shift forward.
mhm.
Um, but it makes me kind of wonder. Maybe it is some neural tension, but I, I don't know that we can say it's tibial. Maybe it's just the long tracking nerves of the,
Yeah.
of the lower quarter. It'd be interesting to see if she, I did you do an upper limb tension test with her in standing?
No, I did not do that. That's a good idea, actually. I did not.
I would be winding her up from above to see what's happening if that makes anything down below worse.
That's a great idea,
Just to kind of
actually.
like start playing with that system a little bit and trying to
Yep.
figure that out from top to bottom a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll show you. I'll tell you what I did. So, I was just thinking something when you were talking. I did put her on the half foam roller. So to try to get her a little bit forward passively, that was no bueno. She did not like that
Mm.
at all. So she was like constantly shifting. So I took her off of that. Her feet, the only other major issue, excuse me, was that with her feet were so rigid. And I said, well, obviously you're trying to, if you're so far back on your, what's the chicken or the egg? If you're so far back on your heels and you develop a rigid bilateral foot rigidity because of it, is that the chicken or the egg? You just don't have the capability or the options in your feet to get your center of mass forward. Whether that's the cause or the compensation, who
Mhm.
knows? Right? I think her feet are definitely part of the issue. I did try to correct her feet and neutralize her feet a bit. That made everything above her belly button again worse. So I said, that's not the primary issue. It's probably something secondary. So what I did was I actually got her, so backward bending or the ability to arch was my main screening tool for her. Okay, because
Mhm.
I also asked her, besides wrapping a sweater around your waist, what makes you feel better? She's like, massaging my quads. I said, oh, that's interesting.
Oh, it
So
makes sense to me.
So what I put her on her tummy.
Because if she's standing on
Right.
her heels, her
Well,
quads are on all the time.
exactly. Her quads and
Mm-hmm.
her abdominals. She's
Mm-hmm.
trying to
Especially
get
upper
herself
abs. Yep.
forward. Yep, exactly. So I put her in prone, chest-femoral nerve. I was like, let me do it just because I because of the whole quad issue. I said, well, I don't think you've got a nerve issue per se in terms of nerve, because she got all nervous when I said the word nerve. But there just something's not moving correctly. So I did a prone femoral nerve test, the slump in prone, and she was not too different side to side, but she was somewhat restricted. And when I had her sort of drop her head, um, the prone knee bend did get better. But that's I'm not going to hang my hat on that. So I had her
Mm-hmm.
do like 10 of those just bilaterally, and then I got her off the table in standing. Then I had her do another back bend, and she was a bit better. Not 100% better. Okay, I didn't expect 100%, but a teeny bit better. So then I turned her over on her back, and I wanted just to check her abdominal tissue, because she's standing there with she's so rigid.
Mm-hmm.
She does a ton of abdominals in Pilates, and
Mm-hmm.
not saying that that's a bad thing, but she's just has this gripping strategy that is just not optimal for what she's doing in standing. And I said, if you can arch your back, you need to be able to lengthen from the front. And if you can't do that, then I don't particularly think it's a facet joint problem, because she's able to arch her back in prone and do other things. But I said it could be your strategy in standing, which is just causing some muscular tension in, so when you do get flared, and it's an insidious onset. There's no particular movement or setting that makes her back hurt. So when you go into like a prone on elbows, even though you can do it, you are unloaded. When you're in standing and you try to extend, you can't elongate the front of your abdomen. So when I had her on her back, she was really tight and rigid through there, which makes sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Let me know your thoughts on that, and I'll just keep moving.
Well, my thoughts are, I want to know what other systems are doing. She's 43. She's postpartum. Is she having any problems with leaking?
No,
Is
no,
she
just a little bit,
constipated?
not constipated, a little bit of leaking 1 month after her second child, but that rectified. That's what
Okay.
she told me. Yep.
And she hasn't had any other leaking since.
No.
So the issue for me is like, why is her deep muscles working so hard all the time?
Right.
This person's had pain for 10 years. Do you have any idea how her pain came on?
She believes it was something with gymnastics years ago. She had back pain in high school, she told me. But it was one of those things where you're a gymnast and you have back pain, then you get treated and it goes away type of thing, and over time. But she didn't live, she's not from New York. So when she came to New York, because it's a different environment than what she was used to, her back pain started to get worse. But I don't necessarily, it wasn't something that, you know, the flare that was a bad, that happened, like traumatic, so to speak. But she did
Mm-hmm.
have it when she was younger, actually.
Yeah, there's some you usually see this kind of overprotective, overgripping, overworking. Part of it may be because she just moves so well. She's just like on the end of being closer to Gumby than being a fire hydrant. So oftentimes different muscles will tend to overwork in a situation like that. But this one just sounds like, for whatever reason, the strategy is really to overgrip, and it just makes me wonder about threat. She's had this for forever, and it's kind of a little eye opener to me that the only way she can cope with it is manual therapy. So that's kind of, she's got that mindset that she needs to be fixed, and
Yeah.
and that's kind of in there a little bit too. But that this whole overgripping of that deep system, you know, kind of signifies that maybe, I don't know, maybe if she could find some balance in her exercises too. It's hard to say. There's a lot of things probably to unpack here. The
Mm-hmm.
idea that her back pain got worse when she moved to New York, like, is that, because oftentimes, pain is the sign of pain means that our system is under threat for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And New York City can be different if you're not used to it. It's loud, it's noisy, you have to know where you're going, people are everywhere. It's just different. And it's just kind of I don't know. Does her pain seem cyclical? Is it coming and going around her periods?
No, no, I asked that, and no, it's not. And
Mm-hmm.
what's interesting is that every time she has back pain, the main thing for her is she can't arch her back.
Right.
That's how it manifests.
Mm-hmm.
So is she gripping? Is that how she's responding to threat? Just gripping her abdominal muscles or her pelvic floor muscles or something,
Yeah, or all of them,
or all of them?
because we do know that sometimes, even when they talk about when you have certain pain, they look to see what's weak and what's not moving and stuff. And actually, what we end up finding all the time is that there's things that are really super over recruiting. They're doing the one thing
Hmm.
that we really don't want them to do, which
Yeah.
is uber loading the joints, because they already don't like compression and standing, and then they're tightening everything up around that, which isn't helpful.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's her strategy. I agree,
Yeah.
and I think that's her main issue. So when I had her lie on her back, and I just did a little manual work in there, just to see or just to feel her abdominals
Mm-hmm.
and psoas, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And she was quite sore, and I was like, well, if you're these are if you're doing a lot of this in Pilates, which is something that she has consistently done over the years, and you're focusing a lot on abdominal muscles and you're translating that strategy into standing in line at the post office or just standing in general, that's a strategy that's not serving you for right now.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have your weight, and I was explaining to her, when you have your weight on your heels like that, you're going to over recruit once, as we said, your anterior chain, just to sort of get yourself centered. It may not get you there, and I don't think it got her there because her feet couldn't adapt to it. But at the end of the day, that's her strategy. So I sent her home because I was a little after the eval. I was like, I wasn't really sure I mean, I had a funny feeling that the thorax was a player, but she did get a bit better when I had her do the femoral nerve glides. I sent her home with that,
Mm-hmm.
and I said, just notice in standing where your center of mass is. And that's what I did. That was the first visit. And I've only
Mm-hmm.
seen her twice. So when I came, and then to have her put her like a wrapper sweater around her, basically, if she got flared up. So I saw her a couple of weeks later because she had to cancel the initial appointment that we made after. So it was a 2 week break between the time I saw her and her second visit. She was feeling better. Not, which could be just whatever I did, or just because it could be just time, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
But she wasn't 100%. So I decided this particular visit, excuse me, I was actually going to go after. I did a couple of things. I was going to go after the thorax. I wasn't going to touch the feet at this point because she came in to see me at the second visit, and she said, "I think I slept wrong. My lower ribs are really sore." And I was like, "Okay." I don't like to sort of chase pain like that, but I wanted to go after her thorax because I felt that that was the only thing that at that point was that, whenever I moved her or changed her position, that was the only thing that sort of shifted. She didn't like it. So I went after that. And I'll just make a long story very short. I did this mostly in standing. So I just went up and did some decompression, of her lower thorax or upper thorax together. And then I said, just show me how you arch your back, et cetera, et cetera. And she was able to, you know, arch her back a bit better. So I'm just showing you here on on the Zoom thing. I had my left hand on her upper ribs, my right hand on her lower, and just doing just decompression but from above and below, just to give her some space in her lumbar spine. And then I was able to shift her weight a bit more forward.
Mm-hmm.
So then she was able to back bend a lot better, which makes sense. You give someone space, you help, you put a little input into their system. If you're doing the right thing at the right time, it will help them do whatever they need to do better. I mean, it wasn't
Mm-hmm.
100%, but I needed to find something that a region of the body that I could actually intervene. And that's what I did. So I had her lie on her back. I put my hands in the same positions, and I'm very sort of brief here. I did some decompression, and I just had her do some lateral costal breathing and had her do some lower trunk rotation, right and left. And then I had her do a bent knee raise
right and left. And then I had her just do some heel slides, all with just breathing in, into my hands. I'll stop there and you let me know what you think.
Oh,
Anything?
I think that's, again, I think it's the whole system being compressed, and it's, just that typical, kind of hypermobile female postpartum thing, and the trunk does get very, very stiff as far as the thorax goes, and any kind of movement you can get in there is great.
Yeah.
I like the decompression. I usually just I teach them how to grow tall so that they can get out of that and change those strategies. But the stuff that you're doing is, all the same, and movement and rotation.
Hmm.
In the thorax, the thorax rotates so beautifully that getting rotation going in there is amazing. And, getting that opened up, what it feels like to me is that she needs to learn strategies to deal with her pain.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I mean, I thank you for mentioning rotation. I did
Hmm.
check that on the first visit, and it was quite limited. Not
Yeah.
surprising.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I agree with you there. I think that with her, because I'm still trying to get to know her. I've only seen her twice, and
Mhm.
she's had this relationship with this therapist, and so, the Pilates is so ingrained into her, which is fine. And and I've done
Mhm.
Pilates. I think it's great. It's
Mhm.
great movement. But her strategy of just gripping her anterior trunk was something I needed to go after. So I had her just do lateral costal breath once again, bent knee raise. I had her do
Mhm.
bent knee fall outs, any lower extremity movement, uh, lower trunk rotation. Then I had her sit on my stool, put her arms, like rest her arms on the plinth so she's leaning forward. And then I just got my hands into her armpits where her pec minor was, excuse me, pec major. And then I was just trying to do a little bit of a dynamic release. I had her once again take a deep breath, lateral costal breath. Then I had her slowly move her hands forward onto the plinth. And if I felt like a barrier engage, I would have her take another big deep breath, and then exhale, and then move her hands a little bit more forward. So that was more of a dynamic
Mhm.
breath with movement, dynamic release with movement. Then I got her up and I had her against the wall, so facing the wall, hands on the wall, straight. And then I kept her sort of at 90 degrees of shoulder flexion. Then I had her move her feet side to side, so the arms were stationary and her hands were moving. Same pattern.
Mhm.
My hands up in the armpits, do some deep breath, release, move to the right, move to the left, and then I had her sit back down and I tested her trunk rotation. It was better. Then I had her stand and I had her arch her back because that was the thing that was most meaningful for her. And
Mhm.
it was about 50% better at that point.
Mhm.
Then I got her out into the Pilates. We have some Pilates in our gym. I got her on the Wunda box, the WUNDA box. I had her go prone on that, her hands on the bar with the springs, if anybody's familiar with the Pilates box. So she's lying over the box prone. Her hands are on the bar with the springs pushing down. And as she's letting go, gravity is helping her going up into sort of a prone on elbows position, and then she would push down. So which would, for me, I got the extension passively with the bar coming up. Then I had her push down, and I had her imagine balloons in her armpits because of the thorax. People have a hard time pushing, so I had her imagine balloons in her armpits as she pushed down on the box, and then as she came up, she would extend and she would push. And I did that for a series of, like, I would say 10 repetitions. I got her back up, tested her extension again, and that was another 30% I got out of that. Then
Mhm.
I had her sit on a Swiss ball. Same cues, balloons in the armpits, imagine space, whatever works for the patient.
Mhm.
Then I put my hands in up in the armpits again, and then I wanted to make sure that she was breathing and everything was quote unquote, nothing was really shifting too much for this particular task. And I had her try to do an anterior and a posterior pelvic tilt on a Swiss ball to see if she could get that arched position from below. And she was able to, with the breath work and me giving her a little decompression. I
Mhm.
did about 10 of those, got her back up, and she was able to extend fully, completely. And she looked at
Mhm.
me and she was like, I've never been able to get that range of motion so quickly in a session. And I
Mhm.
said, well, I said, it just depends on your strategy and where you are and the right movement
Mhm.
patterns. And
Mhm.
it's a lot of it's movement and breath. So I'm going
Yeah.
to stop there and you give me your thoughts on that
So
because
the
that's
breath,
really what I've done so far with her.
yeah, so I think that's great. The breath part is really important. How you get the breathing is, there's thousands of ways to get it done, but it's important because triggers a central nervous system uh, that is not as threatening of a movement, and it's coming out and changing the motor pattern is really essential in changing the neurotags that extension pattern has with it, because she's got
Mm-hmm.
several neural tags built up with that, as we talked about.
Yep.
But you're not going to change those until you introduce new novel kinds of things into the system. And so I'm curious to see how you got her to do this at home. I have thoughts in my head about how it would happen, but I'm curious to see what you did.
So at home, she has a Swiss ball, but it wasn't blown up. So I'm like, well, that's not happening. Okay. Excuse me. So what I had her do, I actually got her on her hands and knees. I said, you know, we need to get you to arch your back or extend a little bit. I gave her a few things. She wanted to know if she should still do the femoral nerve glides. I'm like, yeah, it's helping, but I don't think you need to do a bazillion things. I'm of the opinion less is more, but that didn't took her less than a minute to do. So I had her on her hands and knees. I had her go into a little bit of, sort of cat camel. And then I had her imagine she had the balloons in her armpits. I had her really arch her back in that position and just go into a little bit of a child's pose and back out. So not like fully child's pose. So she would round her back. It was
Mm-hmm.
more stay in extension. And if you find your back starting to round, don't, don't. Just go stay in that limited range and imagine you have the balloons in your armpits. That's one thing I gave her. And I said, if you go see your Pilates instructor, do the box, because she doesn't do that much with the Pilates instructor. It sounds like they're very much focused on anterior chain. So then I had her put her hands against the wall, feet about hips width apart, and do a teeny mini squat, almost like doing an anterior and a posterior pelvic tilt on the way down. And she was able to get that. It was hard for her to coordinate that, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
So I just said, look, if you try to play with your center of mass backwards and forwards, if you cannot get your center of mass forwards, you're not. It's going to be hard for you to really get into that lumbar extension in standing.
Mm-hmm.
So play with that a little bit. I didn't really give her that. I mean, I told her to play with it a bit. The main thing that I gave her was the on the all fours, the femoral nerve glides. Then I had her lying on her back, because I feel that if the thorax is the issue, I've had success with training good control there, just doing some tricep extension skull crushers. That's it, just to build capacity in the thorax. That's what I gave her. That's what I sent her home with, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And then she went away, so I didn't want to overload her. And that's where I'm at. So let me know what
Mm-hmm.
you would have done, or what you think I should proceed
Yeah,
with.
no, I like what you did, and I would have just explored with her standing with her hands on the wall. I would have explored bringing her feet out,
Oh,
um,
center mass. Yep.
so that she was more in a wide base too, because you'll bring on the pelvis a lot more quicker,
Yep.
and they don't have the issues with the feet as much. So,
Mm-hmm.
but again, the neural tension piece. If it's easier for her to drop down with her feet wide apart versus with her feet narrow, that kind of also kind of says to me what's happening neural tension wise, or anything up and around or around the central nervous system. So I just think there's probably something to winding her up and seeing how she rotates with her with her hands up by her ears, kind of in the ulnar nerve stretch, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yep.
to see what those movements look like when you actually add the upper neural tension into it, because that may be what's pulling her thorax and limiting her thorax so much.
Yep.
And it's something that I see a lot in postpartum.
Oh, interesting.
Mm-hmm. So,
And why
because
is that, do you think?
I have no idea. The thorax is stiff in
Yep.
pregnancy. It has to be, because the baby's growing forward. The thorax has to go backwards, or you'll fall over.
Mm-hmm.
And then carrying the baby and holding the baby and breastfeeding the baby and lifting the baby, and there's just a lot that goes into that, and so you can get a lot of tension throughout that system. And so sometimes, it can play a part. It's hard to say. It's hard to say with her, because she's had this for such a long time. That whole thing could have been set up from way back when she was doing gymnastics
Yeah.
and all of the arm work and the body moving on the arms and the stuff and everything. And
Yep.
so Yeah, but all those are great. So the only thing I would have done different was just add, for the squat part of it, would have just brought her feet out to see
Yep.
if you could ease up the movement a bit for her,
Yep.
and explore if she, like, does she have pain when she picks up her kids? What is she picking stuff up from the floor? Any of those kinds of things. And I would have probably given her a strategy of maybe if you stand with your legs apart more as you bend over,
Mm-hmm.
and see how it feels, and see how
Yep.
when she straightens up.
Yep.
If she brings her feet apart when she leans backwards, does that make a difference as all too? Just kind of looking at that base of support a little bit.
Yeah.
Imagining the air balloons is great because that brings capacity to her to not have to have cues, to internally cue herself. And if that works for her, that's great, you
Yep.
know.
Yep.
Um, and I think that's wonderful. So, my cue is helping them grow tall.
Yeah, it's a
Air
good one
balloons
too.
work, any of
Yep.
those things are great. So, but I think that the most important part here is that she's starting to learn that she has the capacity to create change in her own system,
Yes.
rather
Yes.
than somebody needing to just target her lumbar spine and hammer away at it.
Yes.
This is something that's definitely got the whole system involved in finding the pieces that can actually give her relief, and a change in the motor pattern that has all the neurotags with it is super important,
Yep.
because
Yep.
that's been around for a long time. This is a chronic problem, and so uh, that piece is really important. That novel movement into the system, and the breath is great because it takes the system out of a sympathetic uptake.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're having pain, you're having threat, and your sympathetic system is going to be in overdrive. And
Yep.
that may be one of the reasons that she's gripping those muscles so much,
Yep.
because her system is saying, don't move.
Yeah.
And so now
Yeah.
what you're doing is bringing movement in, but you're bringing it in from a different way. And it's like, oh, well, wait, this isn't the movement we're trying to protect against.
Right.
So then it can
Exactly.
kind of start letting go and recoordinating and
Yep.
doing those things. So yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. No, I
good.
agree. I think with the feet, playing with the base of support, also challenges the thorax in different ways.
Hmm.
From
Oh
medial
yeah.
lateral. For her, I think uh, I think will help. I just had a thought when you were talking. It's escaped my mind. Oh, with the squatting, that's a great idea. So with her, when I gave her when I was doing some release work with her hands against the wall and her sidestepping, that definitely brought some recruitment of certain muscles on. That's what I do. I sort of feel for them. I put my hands on where I think the region of the body is that I need to intervene in, and when they move, if I feel some muscles gripping, I have them stop. I have them do some breath work, then I'll have them move again. So her hands were on the wall and she was slightly shifting to the left with her feet, and these muscles were turning on for whatever reason because she was changing her center of mass. So I
Hmm.
think that's a great idea, even just to give that to her as part of the home program. I'll be curious to see the upper limb tension in standing, because that I did not do
Hmm.
in the evaluation. For the listeners, I did do your typical. I did just quickly check, her slump test and all of that, and that was negative. And I did just the passive accessory vertebral mobility. I did check that very quickly. I did all the dermatomes. I did all of that, and that was obviously all negative, right? And somebody like this is you're not going to see a lot of things aren't going to jump out as much in sort of your passive movement testing unless they're in a significant flare. And she was, but that was her normal flare. It wasn't like this was something new to her. So her body knew how to quote unquote adapt, not to she didn't cope, but she definitely adapted. So
Hmm.
I did do that. And when I see something like with the tibia, with that center of mass so far gone, so far back, and her gripping strategy, at some point, you gotta sort of nothing else crazy, except for the feet. I am going to intervene at the feet at some point, but I'm not going to do it in the next visit. So I think these are great ideas. I will report back on her because she's quite interesting, and I don't think she picks her kids up anymore, but I do think that she does stand on her left side still, even though I didn't see that in standing. But I think when I load her up, she will do that and resort to that strategy when she had her boy, 5 years ago, held
Mm-hmm.
him in her left arm. And that's why I gave her excuse me, some tricep skull crushers, I call them, in supine, just to get some capacity and some robustness to the thorax. And then I'll get her up and have her do some closed chain. So
Mm-hmm.
I'll report back on her, and because I think she's quite
Sounds
interesting.
good.
They're all quite interesting. Anyway, thanks a million, and we will see you next time.